Picture this. You couldn't be a Spartan citizen unless you killed a slave. They say Sparta was a warrior's paradise, a land where boys were carved into men with steel, sweat, and silence. But behind the polished bronze of Spartan helmet, behind the elegance of their statues, and the glory chanted in modern gym walls, was something older. They were Greeks too, locals from Messenia, conquered generations ago. They were farmers, shepherds, mothers, sons, bound to the land by Spartan decree, treated not as servants, but as state-owned beasts. They outnumbered Spartans almost 10 to 1, which made their existence a threat. A ritual so savage, so drenched in blood and paradox, that few dare to speak of it plainly today. To be a citizen of Sparta was not a birthright. It was not gifted. It was earned, not through gold, nor intellect, nor favor. His mother had named him after victory, but in Sparta, names meant little. At 7, he had been taken to the Agojda harsh training school where boys were starved, beaten, humiliated. Fires flickered in Helot homes, casting soft orange glows that reminded him of his mother's hearth. He told himself they weren't people, just enemies, tools, obstacles to his ascension. He counted his steps, watched how he kissed his daughter's forehead before sending her indoors. A man with calloused hands and soft eyes. One step, another. The crunch of a twig. The man turned. Where kindness was weakness, and weakness was treason, Nicandros had survived. He had learned to steal, to lie, to fight, blindfolded. But nothing, not even the beatings from his instructors, could have prepared him for the cryptia. As if the Helot knew this was always going to happen. As if he had been waiting for it. There was no scream, just a silence that swallowed everything as Nicandros drove the dagger forward. Once, twice, until the warmth of life seeped through his fingers. No cloaks. The silence was part of the lesson, part of the ritual. Not just silence from your lips, but from your soul. You buried the voice that cried in the night, buried it beneath the stone of discipline. That was the Spartan way. He had passed the test, but what had he become? The dagger had taken a life, but it had also carved something out of him, left an absence no metal could fill. Still, he wore the silence like armor, no shoes, and unspeakable. To disappear into the Helot lands. Another had teeth marks on his arm. It was small, hidden in a gorge between the cliffs, guarded by nothing more than a few sentries with slings. The ephors had expected a mob. What they found instead was a school, children being taught to write in the dirt, elders sharing bread, a priest reading from scrolls that spoke of freedom and dignity. She looked at him not with fear, but with defiance. The same look the man splitting wood had given him years before, as if to say, "We know what you are, we know what you do, and we still see you." Clenching blades, chasing shadows, becoming men by snuffing out lives deemed disposable. Another never came back at all. His name was removed from the rolls, as if he had never existed. He trained, marched, bled with his peers. Each year, the ephors, the 5 elders who ruled Sparta, declared war on the Helot population. It was not a metaphor. Sparta literally declared war on its own slaves to justify killing them without violating religious law. A blood ritual disguised as policy. His body grew harder, but something beneath it softened. Of songs being sung that hadn't been heard since before Sparta's conquest, Nicandros, now 25 and leading a small patrol, was tasked with investigating. He began to notice the Helots again, not as enemies, but as shadows with faces, children with crooked smiles, women with tired eyes. He no longer led with fire or invasion, but with stillness, the kind that settles over a house long abandoned. Statues weathered the centuries, but the heartbeat of Sparta, the ritual, the blade, the silence died with the last of its true believers. He simply watched, no inscription, just a simple stone. The Helots, still forbidden from mourning. The Spartans openly left no flowers, and reported it abandoned. He placed a single olive branch on the stone, not in reverence. In recognition, it was built by what it chose to forget, nothing of interest. The city that demanded silence had forgotten how to listen. The boys it shaped into ghosts returned home without language for what they had done. They grew into men who could not hold their children, could not touch without flinching, could not sleep without hearing footsteps behind them. The city still marched in time to the beat of its own myth. But fewer boys now passed through the cryptia. The wars with Athens had drained Sparta's strength. The Helots, ever the backbone, still tilled the soil, but with deeper creases in their faces. The defiance had quieted, but not vanished. The ephors raised no questions. Sparta had long since learned not to look too closely at its own reflection. Men with the same stoop as his father once had, splitting firewood in winter. That, too, was part of the lesson. Sparta remembered only those who endured. It forgot the rest. And when he returned to Sparta weeks later, no one asked what he had done. They could see it in his silence. His muscles moved like cables under the skin, worn from years of labor. He wasn't a threat, just alive. Still walking with that same spine, that same fire in her eyes. She never acknowledged it, but he knew she remembered. Too alive, some did not. And those who came back didn't speak of what they had done. They bore no medals. Just the hollow, unreadable eyes of boys who had crossed the river between life and death, and returned soaked in its waters. Hide in the shadows, watch, wait, and kill. Any helot who seemed strong, outspoken, or simply unlucky enough to be noticed. It had to be done in silence. No glory, no witnesses. The point wasn't just to kill, it was to learn how to become a phantom. A ghost. A man who could strike and vanish. A Spartan. No weapons, except a dagger, and whatever courage had been beaten into them since they were 7. The elders gave no instructions, only a nod. No, it was earned by taking a life. But not just any life. The life of a helot, a slave. The helots were not foreigners, and the Spartans invented a tradition that would become legend. A test of loyalty, cruelty, and silence. The cryptia. It began at night, when the air turned cold and the stars stabbed the sky like silver teeth. Spartan boys, no older than 15, were taken into the wilderness, and the boys understood their task was simple. Some boys returned. Nicandros was 15, and on the first night, he did not sleep. 4 days he wandered the outskirts of Messenia. The wind whispered through olive trees, and then he saw him, a helot man, older, maybe 40, splitting wood behind a hut. Nicandros watched him for hours, and in the dark, Nicandros moved forward. He wrapped his hand around the dagger, his breath slow, his heartbeat louder than thunder in his chest. Their eyes met. What Nicandros saw in that man's face was not fear. It was recognition, not of him, but of the moment. He stayed there long after the man had gone still. He buried the dagger and washed his hands in the dirt. Nicandros was now a Hermaios, an equal, a citizen, a Spartan. But no one told him how often that man's eyes would appear in his dreams. The blood dried quickly in the Spartan air. Nicandros did not speak of it. No one ever did. But Nicandros was not alone in his silence. Around him, boys returned to the city with the same eyes. One limped from a wound that had gone septic, and so Nicandros was given a red cloak and a seat at the common mess. He stood taller, but not prouder. Years passed, but the law did not bend for thoughts. The helots remained subhuman by decree. The cryptia continued, year after year. Each new generation of boys stepped into the night, and then came the year the helots pushed back. It began with whispers, rumors of a gathering in the hills, of helot leaders forging weapons from farm tools. They found the camp on the 5th day. Nicandros raised his hand. His men stood ready, and in that moment, he saw the girl. She was maybe 12. Hair like woven coal, eyes like polished glass. Nicandros lowered his hand. The men hesitated. One of them stepped forward and said, "Orders, sir." Nicandros said nothing. And for that moment, just one, he let the silence mean something else. They left the gorge untouched, but Nicandros knew he had crossed a second river, and this one ran colder. Years later, long after his hair grayed and his limbs stiffened from battle, Nicandros sat alone in the upper fields. The olive trees still whispered. Nicandros no longer wore armor. He would sometimes see her, the girl from the gorge, now a woman, a mother, perhaps. Sparta had won many wars, but it had lost the one inside itself. The city's greatness was measured in fear, not legacy. And so it was that Sparta, for all its glory, faded. Nicandros was buried not with honors, but in a quiet plot beneath the olive trees. But that night a young boy came to the grave, a helot boy, thin, barefoot, but not afraid. Because stories, even cruel ones, linger, and sometimes the ones we bury speak loudest in silence. So remember this. Sparta was not built by strength alone. It was also built by the boys who became men in the dark and never came back whole.